Hi guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lorfarius, and in today's episode, number 17, God, they're really racking up now, we're going to be talking about Street Fighter 2, The World Warrior. But as always, before we jump into that, let's go over some Amiga news. Now, first up, I've just managed to get my hands on a brand new accelerator card, order it a bit since, it's come over from Europe, so it's taken a couple of weeks to get here. Absolutely chuffed to bits with it. It's a 1221 EC card. It's got a 28 megahertz processor, 16 megs of RAM. It was about, I think it was about £90 all told, including shipping, but not very, very expensive. I mean, usually these sort of cards are like £150, £200, so it was quite god to get my hands on this one. Before I just had a standard 8 megs of RAM expansion running in my system. Didn't have any fancy processor, or it just didn't do anything overboard beyond add extra memory. And one of the first things I did was fire up a copy of Frontier and Wing Commander, because even on a stock A1200, those are pretty much, they might as well be screenshots, especially with some of like the cutscenes and the movie-like introductions. It's very, very slow and you're missing frames, but not with this card. It really does run it as well, not 100% smooth, but probably as near, without buying some sort of like souped-up £500-600 Blizzard card. But I was just watching the opening cutscene on Frontier first, and it was brilliant, nice and smooth. You could watch it properly. There was no juddery bits in between. And same with Wing Commander, you could actually move around in space and things, and it wasn't chugging along or freezing. I think the Amigos did a look at Wing Commander a few weeks ago now, and just a standard stock A600, because I played on one of those back in the day, and I think I only had like a 1 meg expansion, and I can't remember it at the time, but looking at that from a standard one, it was terrible. It was really, really, really slow, but there's none of that on this expanded Amiga. It really, really has made a huge improvement. I'm chuffed to bits with it. Next up, I noticed this a few days ago, but basically somebody has created a CD32 controller, which is compatible with all of our Amigas. It's in the style of a SNES controller, you know, typical 4 buttons on the front, start, select, and the D-pad on it. They've called it the Procon CD32. Now, this has got brand new PCB in style. It's inside PCB board inside. All special chips, so it's fresh made and everything. €38 they're looking at, and there's a chap called Witchmaster over on the EAB forums. I think he's making them to order at the moment. I'm not entirely sure, but you can if you want. You don't have to buy them in completed kit form. He will supply the parts as well. It's different price. Obviously, if you're making it yourself, you don't have to pay out extra for it. But for €38, compared to some of the prices for the joysticks you pay these days on eBay, you're looking at £15 to £20. So double that for a brand new pad. That's a pretty good price. And one thing you probably won't realise if you are using a joystick, but a lot of Amiga games, when you switch over to a D-pad, it just becomes a whole new experience. It's 9 times out of 10, it's much, much better than playing on a joystick, unless you're on like some sort of flight simulator or something like that. Next up, I saw a huge announcement the other day by SensibleSoccer.de. They basically announced their Sensible Soccer World Championship tournament, and that's coming on the 21st of July, and it's in Billund, Denmark. They're doing pretty much all the versions of Sensible Soccer, like a Classic Edition, Amiga 1, PC, and these different sections of the tournament you can play against other people. And this has been going for several years now. It might even be close to 20 years, but you know, what an incredible thing for that still to be going on. I think, I'm just looking at the list actually, they've also got the Xbox version, which I think came out on Xbox Live. It had its problems from what I remember, because I did pick it up back on the day. It had a bit clunky issue with the goalkeeper, I think. Anyway, you can play that and many more games. Denmark's not really that far away for most people in Europe, but I think the cheapest cost is €50, and as you pay a bit more in price, you can get like a bed and breakfast included in that. So pretty good price if you want to get involved. I will post, sorry, I haven't said, but as always, I will post the links to these in the show notes and on the AMIGArama.com website. Now, before we jump onto the game, one thing I would like to say, I'm trying to get people to write into the show with emails and letters, and one thing in particular is just to like talk about the games I've been covering, because I'm sure loads of listeners have played these, got their own experiences and what happened with them back in the day, or maybe even how they actually got their hands on a copy, assuming it wasn't pirated. I'd be interested to hear some stories, and it gives us something else to cover on the podcast. If you've any question, either or a story about the Amiga yourself, just drop us a line at Lorfarius@AMIGArama.com, and I promise I'll get back to you. And with that, it's time to move on to this week's game, Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior. Now that's quite a mouthful to be saying out repeatedly, so I'll just be sticking to Street Fighter 2 each time. Now this one is one of those funny ones I do have a bit of an odd experience with. Back as a kid, I mean, I never got to play this on the actual Amiga, but I did get to play, I think it might have been an Amiga Power or Amiga Action or something, a demo disc of it. And I would constantly go around to a friend's house, as did loads of my mates, because we were absolutely itching to play Street Fighter 2 at the time. And he had a cover disc demo. I think it was only on a single. I'm pretty sure it was only on a single disc. I can still remember the picture on the front cover of it to this day. And we would play it for absolute hours. I think it was a very, very restricted demo. I think there was a couple of characters in it maybe, and it was limited to 1 or 2 rounds or something. I don't even think it was a full round of the usual 3, so you're absolutely stuck to it. And the bugger would not give me a copy of it. I mean, I had X copy and all the rest of it, I could have gone down there any time and grabbed a copy, but thinking back to it, it was probably because if I'd have got a copy and everyone else had got a copy, would have just sort of like disappeared slowly, I'll start going around other people's houses, so at least that way he would keep the crowd at his house. Yeah, we were all very funny for children. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, it was published by US Gold. Now, these guys were behind the likes of like Another World, Flashback, them sort of games. I think they published most of the LucasArts games, a lot of the graphic adventures like Indiana Jones. I mean, the first Indiana Jones, The Last Crusade was one of my all-time, for years and years before Monkey Island, was one of my favourite graphic adventures. So they really had a hand in the big licenses of the time, so it's no surprise that they would pick up something like this. But the odd part about it is they went with a company to develop it called Creative Materials. Now, they've done the likes of Summer Games, eSWAT, Days of Thunder, nothing really that stands out as a fighter. And as we go on through the episode, I think you'll come to understand it's a very, very odd choice to have done this. Now, it came out in 1992. I mean, God, that's really, really old. I always thought I was playing that demo in the mid-90s, so I'm just really old. It came on 4 discs, up to 2 players, which for the time was absolutely fantastic, especially for a fighter. Came out at £27.99. Now, that's a hell of expensive, because usually the expensive games are usually about £25, so they were really pushing. They knew what they had on their hands, and I mean, the name alone, it was a huge, huge seller. Now, later on, they did do a Kicks re-release at $14.99. That's usually in the bluish box with the big surrounds on, and they pumped out most of the older titles. I mean, Street Fighter 2 itself it was a sequel to a game that nobody played. I mean, even to this day, I think I've maybe played it once or twice, and it was a pretty poor and average game. It's not even really worth going back to. It was only the sequel that came and did anything special. I don't even think the first game's on the Amiga. I didn't even care. Street Fighter 2 is where the whole series just took off and went somewhere special. Now, the coder behind this was a guy called Gordon Fong. He didn't do many games at all, and both of the ones he did were fighting games. So he did this first, I believe, and then he did a game called Brutal Paws of Fury, which I think was a CD32 game. Anyway, it was a very, very poor fighter, which doesn't say much. I mean, for having someone do like that doing like Street Fighter 2, I mean, I don't think the whole genre of fighters is a very big thing on the Amiga in general, because there isn't that many of them. Graphics were done by a chap called Adam Steele. He did the likes of Summer Games 1 and 2. A big one that stood out was Impossible Mission 2025. He just seemed to be mostly like a contract, what do you call him, a graphician? I don't know. He did the graphics anyway in a few games. He had music by David Lowe. Now this was the guy who done the likes of Frontier Elite, you know, I mean, so straight away, they're quite good music on that. Ghostbusters 2, favourite of mine from back in the day. Afterburner Games. So this guy was definitely experienced in bringing deep musical experiences over. So again, for to be involved with something like this, you'd expect something special. Now, this Gordon Fong, I did try looking into him a fair bit, but he was actually, from what I could read online, several times asked to do interviews about his Amiga games, but he says he didn't want anything to do with it. He just wanted to move on. I mean, the guy is still involved in games today. He's been doing the likes of the Lego games, Lord of the Rings, the Madden series. It's mostly to do with producing games, but he's still involved in the industry. So, I mean, you've got to respect that. I mean, people, you know, to a lot of people, it's just a job. They just did something on contract. They moved on and went away. But it would have been really interesting because the guy, you know, he must still be contactable, but you know, there's a lot hidden behind that game. I mean, why did it end up like it did? I mean, this guy will know. I suspect it's just because it was a US gold title and it was all time precious. I mean, Street Fighter 2 itself, it's one of the highest and biggest, grossest games of all time. I mean, reading the bit of blurb about it, it earned over $10 billion and sold over 40 million copies across all the versions that were released. I mean, that's impressive for the early 90s. If you think that we're not in like PlayStation era where everything's booming and taking off and it's all like mass market and stuff, and yet it was still capable of hitting that many people. I mean, for me, the first version of the game I ever played was on the Super Nintendo. I think my friend's sister got it as a birthday present, and what an odd birthday present, because she wasn't really into games, and she just ended up passing it off to him. And I can vaguely remember going down there and playing, and I could never played a fighter properly, I don't think, at all at this point, and I was just hooked on it. There was something very special about it. The playability was just right, even though the SNES is supposed to be a poor version. Back then it just didn't pick up on it whatsoever, and I was absolutely hooked on it, and we had multiplayer battles on it, and friends came around, and it was just a really, really good game. I mean, the whole game itself is very, very simple. It's aiming for the 3-match knockout, you know, knock them out twice, you've won. If you draw one, you go on and have another match. Nice and easy. Each characters have a story of their own. There's nothing too fancy. I mean, I can't even remember some of it. I'm suddenly struggling trying to think of what the stories of some of them. You got the likes of Chun-Li and M. Bison's like kill the father, that sort of thing. There's all like, it's all described with very, very simple picture and text boxes on the screen. There's nothing special about it. It's not like as fighters developed over time and they added more and more of these stories on. But then at the same time, do you really need complicated stories for this sort of game? Because you want to be getting straight through the action and having some fun. I mean, the interesting thing about it, I mean, because it was so popular and famous, it was ported to pretty much everything. And one of the funniest versions I did see was a Game Boy edition. Now, this will have probably come out for about 30 quid at the time, and people would have been like climbing over this to get a copy of this, but it didn't look too great from the footage I was watching. This is a very funny game to cover, best because when I usually pick up these games and I come to do the notes and stuff, Patreons can see them, by the way, because I always upload scans of them. I come up with like lists of like good and bad points and just, you know, things to talk around. And I sat down for ages trying to come up with like the good points. I've given it away already, haven't I? This is not a very good game. And I'm sat now with the notes in front of me, and I've got like 4 or 5 good points about it. Probably the best part of it, I mean, keep in mind that, you know, this is Street Fighter 2. It's based off the very, very popular arcade machine, and the good thing about the Amiga is it was quite powerful for the time. And one of the good things this does is the graphics and the detail on the characters. It's it's quite well animated when it works as it should, like compared to the arcade. It's definitely a step up improvement from any of the other systems, especially the SNES. And I like the way the backgrounds were, and I love the animation on the characters when they actually move and when they were doing some of the special moves. Some of the special moves themselves were a tiny bit off, not like I remember, but that might just be me with the old rose-tinted goggles. But it was good to see that the Amiga does have something over the other editions. It did give you an option on the setup screen. Basically, when you move from place to place or to select a character, you get like a world map. You must have played Street Fighter 2. I'd be surprised if anyone listening to this hasn't, because it's like Tetris or something. I think it's just one of them games that everyone has to try. But you do get to select your control types. You get like your keyboard, a joystick, or a pad. Now, I did try playing this I was trying it with an emulator, because I use two pads. I have a PS2 pad, and then I have an Xbox one, which I use on my PC to capture footage with. So I tried it in both modes just to see what it was like. And the joystick mode, I just couldn't get it to work properly. It just felt wrong. It was weird. But when I use the D-pad, as it should do really, because they're best suited to fighters, so I don't think joystick was very good with one button. I did find though with the pad that I got more buttons available, because I was using Xbox One controller as a CD32 controller, and it was as if the game was expanded to use the extra buttons. But trying to use it on a single button, it's just very, very, it's awful. It really is. The moves don't work as you think they should. You have to do lots and lots of movement, pressing the button a certain way. It doesn't work, I'm afraid. So if you are trying this or going back to it, you need a pad straight away. One of the good things I did like though was the animation. As you used a much better Amiga, there's a lot of frame skipping within it, but the animation was there. It was complete. You just needed a much faster Amiga to see it all. Oh god, here we go. I'm running out of points now. Good points for it. You get all 8 characters. Yeah, that's not a lot. You can't, from what I could learn about it, you can't unlock any of the others. But then, you know, it's a very, very early version of Street Fighter 2. It's not like the later ones, like the Turbo editions and stuff like that, where they were Pilot and Championship editions, and I think you doubled the characters up to like 16 or something. There's none of that with this one. It's just a straight, non-fancy port of the original arcade. But the great thing about it is, even with this one, the characters do feel very different from it. I mean, one of my favourites from back in the day was I was using E Honda, because I enjoyed his moves. He was a huge, massive character, and he felt a defensive character to go with. I mean, when someone was punching it felt like they really had to make the effort to get the hit through, and you know, your counters and moves and stuff on. I'm not even a fighting fan, but this is Street Fighter 2, and the difference is there. You can at least feel it. The only problem, which it annoyed me, even this annoyed me back in the day, but Ryu and Ken are basically the same character. All the moves are identical. They just look different. It might as well just be a palette swap. I don't know why they did that. It was a bit cheap, to be honest, but all the differences are here. If you use Dalsim, E Honda, Chun-Li, they do feel like they are separate characters, so they've got that part right at least. And that's pretty much it for the good points. Now, I mean, the list I've got in front of me now of bad points, it's extensive. I had to do an extra page for this. This is how ridiculous it was. But the first of all, you know, this is a fighter, and one of the most important things a fighter on any system has to get right is the controls, and it doesn't. It fails straight. You can tell as soon as you start playing, the controls are not very responsive. It doesn't matter whether you use the keyboard, the joystick, or the joypad, you know, they just don't work. You can be doing like a simple move, which is like, say, jumping and punching, you know, or jumping and kicking, but the buttons don't always respond. You can do the same move like 10 or 20 times, and it just doesn't happen. And I've had that happen repeatedly. But if you play it on other versions, you know, you jump and you punch, it just happens straight away. This doesn't respond, and I think it's tied in with either it might be poor coding or the fact that it skips so many frames of animation. That's the biggest problem with it. I mean, it looks great. It sounds the piece, you think it's going to be a good Amiga game until you actually play it, because it's missing so many frames. Now, a lot of this is dependent on the version you play for which system. I'll get to that in a second, but the problem is if you're stood there and you do a special move, you know, it's supposed to respond on the spot, but if you're missing like 2 or 3 frames of animation and then at the same time someone's trying to punch or kick you and you're having to respond in your mind to counter something or to block it at the same time, it never works because it looks like it's juddering and jittering along. So it's not a very good looking fighter in that sense. I mean, I think is Street Fighter 2 locked to frames on the other system? I don't know. It's just not great on the Amiga. Now, the interesting thing I discovered about this, because I always try these games on different Amigas to see how they run, and 9 times out of 10, there's no difference. But I tried this on an A500, the A500 Plus. I was using an emulator, a standard Amiga 1200 with 8 meg. Sorry, I also had an 8 meg of RAM version and a Blizzard card on top, because the Blizzard, even though it's emulated, that's like the bee's knees of Amiga upgrades and speed and stuff of what you can actually see. Now, all of them did lose frames, but what I did notice is you started at the bottom and then moved up. The speed difference was incredible, and when you got to like the standard A1200 and then started going up in increments towards the Blizzard, it really did make a difference. And the A1200 version, it's almost playable. I mean, it's like an average fighter. It's still very slow. It's a bit clunky, but it's a lot. It moves up. There's more frames of animations coming through. So I might be talking rubbish in how I'm describing there, but the way they move doesn't jitter as much on the 1200 as say it does on the 500. So you think, oh, I can get into the fighting a bit more. But it's still not right, and it still feels like there's something missing and there's something wrong. Now, the funny thing is, when I tried this on the Blizzard card, because I had to give it a go, I thought, this is going to be amazing. You know, it's a souped-up graphics card. It's going to be super fast and all the rest. It'll look great. You know, I get all the frames in. But it turns you'd have to be a ninja to be able to move fast enough to do these. They move like rockets around the screen, and I don't know if I'd set it up wrong or anything. I was playing with it for ages, but no matter what I did, it just came back to this every single time, so it was really disappointing. It was quite funny in a way, though, how fast. I mean, I was having a fight with Chun-Li, and she was moving like a lightning bolt across this screen, and I'm trying to react, and I'm thinking, I can't press the buttons in time to what I'm seeing, so it was unplayable. And if you go too far in an accelerated car, it's not working. It just won't work. Another thing, this sort of ties in with the controls as well, but the special moves, right, they just don't work. I mean, I have played this to death on like the SNES and stuff and on the arcade. You know, I don't do fighters. I'm not a big fighting game fan, but Street Fighter 2 I've put a lot of time into over the years, and every so often I'll dip back into the main series on more modern systems rather. I think that started with about Street Fighter 4, and I've always gone back time to time. But one thing I've always been able to remember is like set characters move, because it's like they're burnt into my brain. I can remember them off the top of my head instantly, like half circle and punch or kick and stuff like that. And they just it's a natural response. And a lot of that comes from the original arcade. And Capcom, and all the other companies who have been involved in conversions of, the point has been that you want that moveset because you want the experience at home to be like similar to what's in the arcade to keep people coming back. But with this one, I could not get a single special move to work. And at first I thought, well, maybe I'm just really, really rubbish at the game and I just can't get it to... I'm just not doing the moves in the correct way. But I purposefully took time in like a 2-player game and just to try and come up with the special moves. None of it would work. I mean, every other system, it's always been the same thing. And I always double check. I thought, well, maybe my memory's going off. It wasn't. I checked it on other systems. That's what they should have been doing. And then I had a look at the manual, and the manual is absolutely horrible because it has these big, it's like a joystick icon with the directions on pointing off it like huge arrows, and it's supposed to tell you which way you're doing and in what order. But it's so confusing the way it's laid out. It's not a very well designed manual, and none of the moves there seem to really match up to what you think they would. And the fact that you're so limited with so few buttons on the Amiga, even with the CD32 pad, it never really works or comes together. Now, one of the other problems I really had with this was the music. When you first fire the game up and you wait for that familiar Street Fighter theme to kick in. It does, but it's very, very dull, and it's missing like a bass line. I don't know how to describe it, but it just doesn't feel like that. It's not got the strength behind it to say this is Street Fighter 2. This is what you're going to be playing, and you've got a little punching sound effect, and it just sounds too weak and hammy. I don't know how else to describe it. But that's the original sign, and then you start playing the game, and the music throughout, it's just off. It's not a very good rendition, and it's a very, very poor version of the original arcade. Now keep in mind that lots of these games at the time, this was the Amiga, they were capable of doing like WAVs and, you know, capturing samples. They could have easily recorded some from the a live arcade machine, or even gone back to like Capcom and said, can we have some? I mean, other companies have done it. I think Indie Heat did it when it went back and got sound effects off the original company. So it was possible. It wasn't done, and they've just been recreated, probably in some I don't know, music creation program of its own, but it just doesn't work, and the sound effects are very, very poor, and it just makes listening to the thing, you just think this isn't like the arcade. It'd be very, very annoying and very, very depressing. One of the biggest issues I had with this as well was the disc swapping. Now keep in mind that it came with 4 floppy discs, and it's a bit random when you first start as in the one-player game, because it selects a character automatically. Now sometimes it's fine because the disc you've loaded it with will contain that character, but other times it doesn't, so you've got to swap over to another disc. But when you put the disc in, it's like it must be loading tons and tons of animation and stuff. It just seems to take an extraordinarily long time. Now I know that's not a problem these days because we've got the likes of WHD load, and this isn't an issue there, but I did try this on the ADF front because I was just interested to see what it was actually like, and God, it must have been so depressing back then, because bear in mind, you just want to get back in and start fighting and moving from character to character. You just can't do it. It's absolutely ridiculous, and sometimes it feels like it's about it's not 5 or 10 minutes long, but it does feel that way. It's a really, really long time, and I don't know how they could have really resolved that, to be honest. Maybe change some of the random setting at the beginning just to spread it out a bit more. I just don't know, but having a swap between discs 3 and 4 constantly. I also discovered, and I don't know if this was the emulator I was using, but I set it up so I had all 4 floppy disks loaded with the disks in. It would only ever let me use disc 1 and 2. 3, I had to keep swapping out 1 and 2 to put 3 and 4 in, and I don't know if that was a limitation either with the emulator, or maybe that happened back in the day and you could only use the first floppy disks, which means, again, that causes problems in itself. But how annoying, how annoying. Now, as a whole, this is meant to be, it's one of the better fighters on the Amiga, and that does not say a lot for the whole genre on the Amiga itself. I mean, it's like, what the hell happened? Now, something very strange must have gone on with this back in the day, because I was looking at the magazine reviews. Now, bear in mind, this came out 1992. I think it was early in the year, about January, something like this, around about Christmas time, probably. Anyway, CU Amiga gave it 90%, Amiga Action 90%, Amiga Computing 90% as well, and The One 89%. A fair few of them will like mega highlight this, which is where it gets a bit funny. But later on, some of the same mags, like Amiga Computing, when they did the Kicks re-release, 68%. The One 67%, Amiga Action 53%. So, I mean, that was only like a year or two apart. So, you know, and they would try to resell it again as a cheaper version of the game. But why did the mags drop the score so suddenly? And to me, this itself should have been a scandal back in the day, because, you know, there's clearly something very, very wrong with them scores. Why would you score something like that so high? Even if you got like an early rendition, like a better version, like a pre-release, it's still going to be full of bugs. This game was not going to be any different. That's so superior before it was released, and then they brought out something even worse. Not across all the mags like that. And then you start thinking, well, US Gold must have been paying either some people or the magazine themselves to get some good reviews, because there is, even on my first go of this, because I was open to playing it, I'm thinking, oh, you know, I'd heard the rumours it was a bad game, but I didn't have like fresh memories of it or anything like that. And within 5 minutes of playing, I'm stood there thinking, this is awful. This is truly awful. And when I was doing the research for this episode and I'm looking into history and I'm just thinking, what the hell's going on with these reviews? It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And again, it should have been a scandal because at the time, you know, kids as teens and everything who were buying like Amiga games, you know, there was no internet back like. It's not like today where a game comes out and then a company can sort of like hide the reviews and stuff. I mean, because the internet's always there as a backup. You can find out within hours or days what something is actually like. So all these people, you know, spending a big chunk of cash on this game, and they were completely dependent on these magazines, to have some honesty about them. But for it to be so bad, because you could maybe forgive one or two, you getting away with doing that sort of thing. But for all of the big mags to be saying, yeah, this is a great game and it's a good version of Street Fighter 2, even the SNES, which is supposed to be a poor one, it's miles ahead of what this is on the playability stakes. And these are like paid reviewers. I mean, they should be ashamed. They really should be ashamed. It's appalling. It really is. I mean, the whole game is just awful. Trying to get some coverage for it to go alongside with the podcast for the YouTube channel, I really, really struggle to do any of the special moves, and I keep trying repeatedly. It's just me losing time, and it's not because I'm poor at fighting games. It's just that terrible on the controls. So you just end up in situations where you're just using standard moves to beat up the other person, but then a lot of the time their frame rate does actually help you out in a way because they're just as crap at it as you are. So it never comes together. Even with the boost, you need an Amiga 1200 and beyond to play this. You really, really do. I wouldn't bother. Anything on 1 mega below, just like Amiga 600 or 500, just do not touch it. It's terrible. It's sort of playable on the A1200. It's not. It gives it a boost, but it's not good enough. It's almost there. It's almost there. But you want something better for a fighter. But I do feel sorry for all those kids. I mean, back then, 28 quid to play a game like this, that was actually a small fortune in the early 90s. And to get this home and to be playing it up and loading it up and getting all excited, thinking, yeah, I've finally got Street Fighter 2, it's going to be awesome. And then you get this mess that's just flopped on 4 floppy disks. I mean, the biggest issue with it is them controls. I mean, why did they change them? I just do not understand it. And it's not because of me. It's just because it's generally very, very poor. I have certain movesets burnt into my brain, like Ken and Ryu's. I don't know how to pronounce it right. I'm probably wrong. But they're useless. They're absolutely useless. I'm programmed to set away because all the games have made me do that. And then I go to this version, it's completely off, it's completely different. And it's just not part of that pantheon of the Street Fighter 2 editions. I mean, the other thing is, the Amiga is more than powerful enough to do this game justice. I mean, it really is. I mean, if you look at, like, you've got good versions of this game on, like, the Sega Mega Drive, for instance, especially with some of the later titles, I think, like the Championship Edition, which used the 6-button controller. That was a really, really good game. And if the Mega Drive can do it, surely the Amiga can do a good version of it as well. It's a very, very lazy port. There's nothing good about it. I mean, as I was playing it, looking into the history of it, I mean, this is the first game I've played so far on the Amiga out of all I've done that has really made me angry. I just lost my temper with it because I was thinking, the Amiga's better than this. We expect better from a fighter. US Gold clearly have just fudged this port out in desperate. They probably did this in like a few weeks. So that's probably why the original guy doesn't want to talk about it, because it was just a nice simple contract fired out and then they were happy with it because it's out on the shelves. But I couldn't find sales figures for this game individually, but I suspect it sold a shed load, especially off the back of those magazine reviews. So yeah, a terrible game, truly. Just avoid it. It's not even worth going back to for curiosity's sake. Just keep your distance and go and play something better. Now, what a depressing place to finish on. I wish I could have picked a much better game now, something not as depressing and miserable. But well, it's all part of exploring the Amiga library. What can I say? Well, as always, guys, I think that's a good time as any to finish there. A big thank you to everyone who's still listening. I mean, we're so far into this. 17 episodes in now, and I'm still rolling out on a weekly schedule. Chuffed to bits. What can I say? If you pop along to AMIGArama.com, there's always loads of info on there, as long as the radio stream and the Patreon if you're so inclined. Big thank you to all of already who's offered support. It is appreciated, and it helps me out with future stuff. Till next time, guys.